Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. As you might be able to hear, my cold is progressing and I'm a little punchy because of it. I'm hopped up on some cold medicine, my head's a little stuffy, but damn it, a lot of news is coming out and Morning Movie News must go on. Of course, the huge news broke late Friday, very telling, by the way, that Warner Brothers would break a story like this late in the day on Friday because people like myself were unable to cover it. I was at home trying to relax when I checked the internet and was like, God damn it. For many reasons. I mean, okay, so first of all, I tweeted this and I said, wow, because it really is a big story. It's just incredible that Warner Brothers, in my opinion, would remove themselves from the board like this. I mean, if you want a snapshot of why Warner Brothers DC movies aren't working, here it is. They just are their own worst enemy. And it's just to think that we will not have a DC movie until 2016 while the Marvel machine keeps chugging along. It just really shows, be prepared. It's one of the most famous mottos of all time. It always pays to be prepared. And Marvel, they have Kevin Feige who's, planning these things out, and, they have like a brain trust over there. Maybe it's just Feige. Maybe he has some people working under him. They always say they have architects. We haven't really been privy to the inner workings of Marvel, but they clearly do have a plan. Yet DC just seems to be a chicken with its head cut off, or being just led around by Marvel, just trying to, it's like that cartoons where someone's trying to lean over someone's shoulders during a test and copy off of them, and it's just a mess. And I think that's what you have here. Now, some people's initial reaction was, I'm not surprised. There's no way they could have been ready on time. I'm glad they're not rushing the film. Now, granted, that is great. If this all results in a fantastic film in 2016, all of this will go away. All of this will melt away. It will have been worth it potentially worth it. We'll talk about that in a moment. I feel they're really losing a lot of their momentum here. But if they can deliver an amazing film, all of these things will melt away, and maybe we'll be able to have a fresh start. But this isn't a fresh start, mind you. They're building on a film, Man of Steel, which, I talked about over the weekend about DC hate, and in the comments I could see people are still just so intensely divided over Man of Steel as to whether or not it was a good movie or a bad movie. And they're very firmly entrenched in either camp. Is that really something you want to build your whole foundation on? I mean, the first Iron Man, universally loved. I mean, actually, I'm not a huge fan of that, but I think it was pretty good. But, still, really strong foundation for the Marvel Universe. But yet DC is going to build on something that has already have people divided. So that's one thing. People are like, let them take the time to make a good movie. So, true, that's true. Also, the other thing is I think, but as for it being a good movie, I don't really have very much faith in David Goyer or Zack Snyder. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't understand how you mess up Watchmen. Great credit sequence, though. Zack Snyder has a very good career as a sequence credit director. The opening credits were, I think, one of the greatest things I've ever seen. But I don't have any faith in this creative team. So I think you could give them 10 years. You could give them a decade. They don't think they know what they're doing. And I feel that Warner Brothers really, it's their own fault for just letting Nolan and just, lying back and go, Nolan's doing such a great job, when they could have been planning all along, and for the eventuality that he would leave, for how to build beyond that, et cetera, et cetera. They just were completely caught with their pants down. All right, so that's the whole thing about the delay for quality. I feel that's not the reason it's delayed, though. I feel the delay is that they simply aren't ready. Now, there was a rumor going around that Ben Affleck hurt his leg, and that's why production is delayed. But he's not supposed to have a huge part in this movie. So I don't understand why not, to make their date, they wouldn't just rearrange their shooting schedule to work around that. But, apparently his leg is so injured that the movie needs to be pushed back for a year. That makes no sense. Why don't they even push it maybe to, around when Star Wars is coming out? There's really no good time of year to release a movie anymore where you're not going to have to deal with a lot of competition. You just have to trust on the material to rise above. So I think they could have done that. They could have moved to maybe December 2015. But now they're going to May 2016 on a Marvel date. More on that in a second. So I think that it doesn't make any sense to me that they would have to delay this movie because of an injury. I feel, and some of you actually, there was a very big comment in my Golden Globes reaction that disagrees with this, but when Ben Affleck came out to give the award at the Golden Globes, I felt he just clearly didn't look like he was the physical condition that he needed to be in to be Batman. He looked like he had more than just 2 or 3 weeks to go. And also, we all know that Gal Gadot is going in for her training, and is she really going to physically drastically alter herself in, 2 to 3 weeks? It's just not feasible. Their talent just isn't ready, I think, to go in front of the camera. Look at Henry Cavill. It's been well documented that he worked very long and hard to physically get himself into character for the role, and I think that's a big part. Physicality is a big part of these superhero movies. These actors are playing characters that need to be big, dominant physical presences. It's Robert Downey Jr. lucked out that he just wears a suit. He could just walk on to set, the next day. But, for these DC movies, these guys need to look like, because, Batman in particular, Bruce Wayne has always been at his physical peak to be able to operate. So I think that's a problem. Also, I was very suspicious, even before this was announced, that Lex Luthor casting had not been set yet. You have a movie that's conceivably going to be shot in 2 to 3 weeks beginning, and your major villain isn't cast. So I feel, now someone could argue that they knew they were going to put this on hold, so maybe that's why they were doing it. My feeling is potentially they haven't been able to sign somebody good enough yet. They haven't been able to convince someone to board the film who they think is really going to seal the deal. So that might be another issue. Contract negotiations might be ongoing, and they might have trouble convincing people to board this ship, which is a risky move. I mean, as we all heard the rumor, they're trying to talk Denzel Washington into joining maybe. They've just had meetings with The Rock. All those elements, come into play that maybe they're like, what, we just don't have a good enough picture yet to move forward. And so we just simply don't have these roles cast, which I think speaks to caution that other people aren't just, I think you get a phone call from Marvel, I think very few people pause. So I think that's an issue. Now, as for this release date, it's been a lot of people talking about the fact that they've picked the first weekend in May 2016, which Marvel has already claimed. I think Marvel should move, quite frankly. I think Marvel should rise above this and not get involved in such a petty match. They're clearly winning this race, even more so now after this delay. So why get into this with Warner Brothers? Why have a slugfest? Disney has so many dates reserved for their animated projects. I mean, they've just gone in and just picked things. And also, is it really fair to reserve a date for Untitled Project? I mean, it's like it's like calling dibs with absolutely no backstory or detail. It's kind of getting to be, it is like children almost playing a game. Like, I got you. No, you didn't. My invisible force field was up. And you're just like, come on, guys, really? So I think, if I were Marvel, I would just move and be like, whatever, you can have it. Because you're probably just I'll come out a week later because your movie's probably not going to be very good. So there's that issue about the date. Now, what does this mean for DC about being off the board for so long? I feel they're totally going to lose their momentum. They have very good momentum coming off of the Nolan trilogy. I think it dissipated a little bit with The Dark Knight Rises because that was a somewhat disappointing film. But yet still, as you can see from Man of Steel's success, people were very interested to see this universe continue. And even though it's supposed to be a fresh start, a lot of the thematic and tonal aspects carried over from the Nolan trilogy to Man of Steel. I mean, it was supposed to be a fresh start, but I think we all agree it didn't feel like a totally fresh start. So all that momentum will be lost. Maybe that will play to Warner Brothers' advantage. Who knows? Again, if they can have an amazing trailer for this come out, everyone will just be like, whatever, it's great. But I think that Warner Brothers, we've been discussing it a lot here on Beyond the Trailer, they've been doing a great job dominating the headlines. With their cast, they have had casting announcements, and they've really been able to turn a lot of heads. At Comic-Con, they were huge. They were the biggest story to come out of that. I know a lot of you disagree with that because you feel Age of Ultron was big, but in terms of the mainstream media, like when I was in the elevator for my office building, it was the it was the Batman, Superman, and then later the Ben Affleck news, of course, when that came out. That's what was on the ticker in the elevator on the news for people going to work. It wasn't, James Spader, Age of Ultron casting didn't make the ticker. Avengers 2, Age of Ultron didn't make the ticker. Because as I talked about in the DC hate video that went up this weekend, people aren't familiar with Ultron, so it's not news. James Spader, not as big a star. But Ben Affleck playing Batman, big news. But now, who's going to talk about the DC film? It's so far away, and there's so much to talk about for 2015. They're just going to be completely, they've just taken themselves out of play, and they've knocked the wind out of their sails. And I think that I don't think that the movie needed to come out in 2015. They needed to find a way to make it work. I just think this is just such a horrible blow to them. And I think that it almost might take away some people's, who are on the edge, fans who still were supporting them, to just say, you know what, guys, we bow out. And also, it looks like they don't even want to try and compete in a very crowded, difficult year, 2015, which, sees now the Fast and Furious 7, Marvel's Avengers 2, Ant-Man, which is shaping up to be a very interesting film, Star Wars Episode 7. This is a big movie. This is the year to be in. It's almost like, everybody who's who should be at this party. And the fact that Warner Brothers doesn't have a DC movie on the board is just embarrassing. I mean, they're putting this Peter Pan movie in there, but, still, it's totally different demographic, different audience, and I just don't know if that movie will be able to compete with the other players that are out there. So how is Warner Brothers competing in 2015? It's bad for DC movies, it's bad for the studio, it's embarrassing, and it's just indicative of the problem over there of how the studio is being run. All right, so I think that I got everything. I'm checking my notes because I'm sick. Yes? Okay, I got everything about that story. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story, talk about that Marvel date that they're competing with the first weekend in 2016. Rumors are that it's going to be a Doctor Strange movie. And everyone's been saying lately, Johnny Depp, he was who Marvel wanted for Doctor Strange. And everybody's talking about that. But then some more legitimate sources came out and said, no, that was an initial discussion they had over there at Disney and Marvel, but it fell through and they're not going to revisit it. This is just an old rumor being brought up. But a new rumor surfaced over the weekend that the person that is being considered for Doctor Strange, almost to the point where it pretty much is his role, they're saying, is Jon Hamm. Very interesting. Now, of course, Johnny Depp has a great relationship with Disney. He's done a lot of great work for them. The Pirates movies, obviously. And then, of course, he's into this Into the Woods upcoming musical. He's a big, in Alice in Wonderland, he's very big for them. So you can see why that relationship they would consider him maybe for Doctor Strange. But Jon Hamm is just finished Disney's $1 Million Arm, just finished shooting that comes out in 2014, where he's the sports agent who goes to India to find some baseball pitchers. And so I think there's a very good chance that they maybe liked what they saw. We hear that all the time, that studio executives will see a smaller film and be like, I like this person has potential, we need to invest in them. It's like what people are saying about Adam Driver over at Warner Brothers for potentially Nightwing. They saw a smaller film they'd made for him, and they were like, we need to keep this guy in-house. So Disney might be feeling that's what they want to do with Jon Hamm. Now, furthermore, besides casting Jon Hamm as Doctor Strange, the other word is that Doctor Strange will be a major focal point of Phase 3, which might mean that Phase 3 will be all about the mystic arts, which would be interesting because, Phase 2 seems to be very much about space, but then at the end of it, you have Avengers 2 where Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, is going to be introduced, and Joss Whedon has talked a lot about science versus magic there. So that might be opening the door to Phase 3, which will be very magic-based. And of course, Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme in the Marvel Universe, would be the head of that. So to bring him in, he would become a major player. And now there's some concern they're saying, a little bit about his age. He's an older actor, but I think that's a silly comment. I can't believe we're still having that discussion. Robert Downey Jr., of course, has been very successful as Iron Man. Daniel Craig, very successful as James Bond. And I just think it's, Johnny Depp, of course, that's the other person I wanted to bring up. Johnny Depp, he wasn't a teenager or 20-something when he played Jack Sparrow, and that worked great. I was casting the right person for the role. So that's the question. Is Jon Hamm the right person to play Doctor Strange? I think physically, from the comic book, we've always thought of someone a little bit more wiry, thinner, a little leaner, but I think Jon Hamm has more of a superhero type build. It's funny to think of him as someone not in the action, but on, more like a mental superhero. But I think he could be really good. The whole idea of Doctor Strange's, origin story is that he is a great, gifted surgeon who's injured his hands and could no longer do that. So then he went and studied, the mystic arts to become almost like, I guess you could say, a mystical surgeon or whatever. I think Jon Hamm could really go with that. I think he has a lot of gravitas as an actor. I think he can portray the depth. It's a very mental character, Doctor Strange. So you really need someone who can portray that angst, all that stuff. I think Jon Hamm is a great choice. Can he carry a movie? I don't know about that. I don't know if audiences will want to go. Mad Men will be done by then, though, so conceivably he could then jump. And I think it's great that, I really wanted him to end up in one of the comic book universes. Marvel and DC are really competing for actors at this point, and I'm glad it looks like Marvel's drafted him and gotten to him first. And also, the other thing that I think is very interesting, it's outside of the box casting, and I think it really has served Marvel well, and I think DC should take a page from. Michael Douglas in the Ant-Man movie, Paul Rudd, this is all very clever. The other thing I want to say to this, though, is that also if Marvel is going to go in the mystical direction for Phase 3, this will also be a direct competition with the Sandman movie that Warner Brothers is planning, based on the Vertigo DC comic that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's supposed to head up. He's definitely producing it, he'll potentially star and direct. But again, these guys are going to be going head-to-head on the same subject matter. It's destructive to the whole genre, and I wish that they wouldn't do that. So we'll see. We'll see. For Phase 3, jumping around so much like that from the Earth to space to mysticism, it'll be interesting. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story of the day, very interesting. We're talking a lot about how foreign film markets are becoming quite powerful and very competitive. And for instance, I recently reviewed the trailer for The Monkey King from China, and I talked about the fact that they brought in a Hollywood special effects person and a Hollywood makeup team to really work on that film and raise their game. And China is becoming very competitive. They have a very successful box office there. There's a lot of money on the table, and a lot of the money is going to homegrown films. There might be some shady dealings as to how films are distributed and if Hollywood films are intentionally put at a disadvantage, but not discussing that, still, the Chinese film industry is becoming very vibrant and aggressive. Now, it was just announced last week that they've hired their first big Hollywood director to come over there. That's fascinating. Justin Lin, who rose to fame on the Fast and Furious franchises, and next will do the next installment of the Bourne franchise, also for Universal. Well, that comes out in 2015, by the way. After he makes this next Bourne movie, Lin will go to China to make a Chinese-language remake of 1982's Shaolin Temple, which will be in Chinese. They're saying they might potentially make an English language version at the same time. I think that would be very expensive to shoot basically the same movie twice, but we'll see. It was certainly a Chinese movie with an American director like that, and they're saying they want to hire a Hollywood screenwriter. If they can make a movie that's competitive and they could release it in America, maybe it would be worth that extra time. But it's just fascinating. We hear all the time about directors making a name for themselves in other countries, whether their home country or, for instance, the Raid 2 director, as you guys pointed out, I think he's from New Zealand or something. I forget exactly where he's from, but, he went to Indonesia to build himself a career there. And eventually the end game is Hollywood. But to have a Hollywood director go to another country, not just to shoot a film on location, but to make a film for that country's film industry, is a fascinating development and turning point. And it'll be interesting to see who might get the phone call next. Because, hey, if the paycheck's good and the project's good, but kudos to Justin Lin. We've had a lot of Asian talent coming up behind the camera in Hollywood, and I think it's great that he is going to be going to China and helping them with their film industry. Well, we'll not even talk about the communist problems over there and such. I think generally it's nice. All right, so today's viewer question. This comes from JP Hernandez. He says, "Hello, Grace. I have the cold. I'm so sorry you're sick too, JP. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. I feel horrible." Oh, me too. But I had to go up and check to see if there was a morning movie news this morning. That makes me feel so nice, JP. And when I saw there was, I got extremely happy. That's just, that's the medicine for me this morning, JP. So then he does have a question. He says, I am a long-time viewer, but I'm first time asking a question. What is the difference between indie films and mainstream? And he says, I have a sense of what the differences are, but what is the main factor that sets them apart? There are a lot of big differences, I think, but if you're going to talk about indie versus mainstream film, the terminology you have there is incorrect a little bit, though. It's indie films versus studio films. And the difference there is financing. An indie film, they get the money together however they can, often from private investors or a group, Kickstarter sometimes, but they have no guaranteed distributor. They have to go and then play the festival circuit and try and get a distributor to pick them up then. Basically, it's like their project is a little bit too risky for anyone to invest in it up front. So a studio will then go and say, well, you go get the money together, and if I see the end product and like it, I will buy it, and therefore you will turn a small profit and be able to pay back your investors. And some distributors make a very lucrative business doing that. Harvey Weinstein, for instance, is famous for being able to go to a studio and pick the independent films he feels have a shot. And of course, when you think about it from a financial point of view, he's not really having to lay out any money up front, and he still has a very successful slate because he's picking up these movies when they're already done. When he writes a check, instant movie. He doesn't have to wait for the thing to come together, be shot, etc. So that's an independent film. A studio film is paid for by the money that the studio has together. They have a budget every year. Often that comes from hedge funds, big Wall Street hedge funds often supply the financing, hundreds of millions of dollars. Relativity Media, which is now a production company, started out as a film financier. Brett Ratner, for instance, now has a very strong business as a film financier, although he's getting back into directing with this Hercules movie with Dwayne Johnson. But still, it's a very different level of money. The studio pays for it. They're involved in the whole production, pre-production. They assign an executive in their production department to oversee the films. For instance, when Paul Walker died, the people figuring out what to do were the screenwriters, James Wan, the director, and the executive in charge of the Fast and Furious franchise for Universal. They put somebody on there. They're very heavily involved in the way the film comes about. And the film, though, is guaranteed distribution. It's guaranteed a great marketing campaign. You're just operating at a different level. Now, the other difference, though, besides the financing, which is the fundamental difference, is really the goal of the film, what it needs to be able to achieve. A mainstream film or studio film, the goal is to make money. It's becoming a little bit to get awards now. I mean, you're seeing the studios become very competitive in the award season with, for instance, American Hustle is a Sony film, and Gravity is a Warner Brothers film. But at the end of the day, they want to win those awards to make more money, because if the movie gets a bunch of awards, people will go and see it. So that's a big element there as to why they're willing to put that money into that. So, but that's the main goal. A studio film wants to make money. An indie film can only make so much money because it's never really going to get even potentially the wide distribution it needs to make a lot of money. So an indie film's goal is to get the great reviews and to really please New York and LA audiences and the industry and critics. As I said, great reviews. But while a mainstream film is supposed to please as many people as possible, a huge demographic. So you're playing on a different level of the audience the film is intended to reach. And you know what the criteria for success is. An indie film very rarely will turn a profit, even though they're very cheap to make. But still, if it gets great reviews and a lot of media attention, it's considered a success. And that's because indie films, I mean, there are some people who are career indie filmmakers. For instance, Jim Jarmusch. I don't think Jim Jarmusch has any interest in going and making a big Hollywood film. He's never going to pull down a big paycheck, and some of you might argue that's not important, but he's also never going to be considered, you know, a really big contributor to the medium of film. He'll never go down in film history. He won't be part of that discussion or that narrative. So that, you know, people, for instance, someone made a really good comment, what happened to Steven Spielberg? I love someone made this great comment, I forget who said it, but they said, when I was growing up, it was all about Steven Spielberg, I associated him with imagination. Now I associate him with the history lesson. And that's because Spielberg wants to be taken seriously. He wants to be a part of film history. He already has the mainstream appeal. He already did that, and I think now he's trying to set his place in the history books, and not just in the box office department. So so that's what happens there. So most directors want to get to the height of their industry. It's, you know, everybody wants to get to the heights of their profession. But you know, so with indie film, often the point of an indie film is to make a splash, and then it's like a calling card to get into the big leagues. It's like an introductory way to get in. For instance, Mark Webb, very successful, very well-regarded independent film, 500 Days of Summer, got the Spider-Man gig off of it. So independent film is supposed to get a lot of attention so that the talent can go forward. A lot of times an actor will be like, oh, I need to reinvent myself, go to an independent film. I need people to, you know, notice me. I'm a television actor, but I want them to see how good I can be on a movie. Independent film. So it's a game changer, it's a career changer. And that's the purpose of the independent film. So very different scopes and goals for these two different types of films. So I hope that's helpful. There are, of course, gray areas here, but that's like the basic differences between the two. Thank you for your question, JP. I hope you're feeling better. Thank you for everybody for tuning in. This is a longer episode, but there was so much to say about Batman, Superman. It's I'm trying to cover all the bases here. So I hope you enjoyed it. Some people are enjoying the longer episodes, and I hope that's the case for most of you. I am keeping an eye on the clock. All right, so thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in. Write down below what you think of today's 3 stories, the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, or any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.